So they called me out of bed early this morning to shoot this episode. I don't even think they realize that they called me out of bed actually because it came through a news feed and they were talking about the World Series or something. I didn't even know the World Series was going on. So apparently, from what I'm hearing, the World Series took place and now they're going to be fighting over this land, and that's my interpretation of it. Um, See, where I'm at, for those of you know that don't know, I'm kind of in an area that it's kind of like sovereign but isolated, and this area is actually ruled by the number eight. It vibrates to the number eight, and in most of my videos, you hear me talk about gold, oil, and drugs, and how gold, oil, and drugs is equal to our currency. So our currency is supposedly supposed to be backed by either gold, oil, or drugs. And America is in bad shape as a whole. Well, America's not in bad shape, but the United States Corporation, I should say, is in bad shape as a whole because they've been printing this currency on commodities that really they haven't fully claimed as theirs. And of course they're going to get mad, but the truth is the truth. So they haven't claimed these commodities as theirs, so they begin to start printing money and having money circulate based on commodities that aren't even theirs. And what's going to happen is that, or what's happening is that all these states are going to go sovereign here in America because nobody's demonstrating the true American doctrine right now because the corporation, the monster, is controlling everything, controlling the food and everything. So when you talk about like gold, for instance, we have plenty of gold, but we don't use the gold in America. We don't mine for the gold in America. The gold in America is mostly located out in California, right? And we don't even really have a legal charter even to go out there and to begin to extract gold out the ground. So you have that aspect going on. And then you have the oil, which is really mostly, America produces oil as well, but it's mostly based in Texas, and they're not mining too much for any oil in Texas. You hear these stories about us getting all this oil from Saudi Arabia and things of that nature. And that's kind of like political. The reason why they're doing that is getting oil from Saudi Arabia is very political because America has the means to be able to produce gold, oil, and all this stuff themselves and not go through De Beers and all of that to get diamonds and these different companies that are actually controlled by sovereigns and nationals overseas. See, America has all of this stuff itself, but we won't go into the earth and mine for it because certain contracts were never complete. Like drugs. Our money is based in drugs, which is ruled by the number eight actually. And that's a lot of the land in the Midwest, and they like to call that the West. But actually, the number eight is kind of like where it stops or where it cuts off when you deal with land. As far as numbers, it kind of cuts off on the number eight. And anything past the number eight going into 9, 10, 11, and 12, this is going into the Western world. So the number eight, they put the number eight in the West, of course, as far as the zip codes and stuff like that, the zip code use. And then you got the 8th Federal Reserve, which is supposedly the Midwest. But the problem is that this is really a cut off area. The Midwest is an area that's cut off, and it's really, that's where all the drugs is at. If you want to talk about drugs like heroin and stuff like that. See, heroin and all that stuff is really actually in the Midwest. And they don't tell us that. So what's going on is that our currency has been produced and supposedly supposed to be backed by these commodities that are in the earth. And the reason why we can't extract these commodities that are in the earth is because we don't have certain land claims with these particular tribes and nations that originally set up a lot of these different bodies of land. So I'm saying all that because you're going to have people that try to claim credit and resources off of this World Series based upon the team that supposedly won. And I'm not going to go into who won or who lost because you can go look it up yourself. But supposedly this Western team won. And you're going to have people in the East and stuff like that, and even in New York and all of that, trying to claim and say, well, I'm with this, I'm on this side, and I'm going to draw credit from this side or the West. And what's going to happen is that's going to create a problem because you're dealing with rates. And you're not paying the rates. However, you're going to start to trade on it because these companies, they're not conscious of these rates that I'm talking about. These rates go back to old Native American and indigenous rates that Native Americans would use these rates, and then if they needed to extract resources on an international level, they would raise enough money off of the commodities that we produce here locally or here on our land, which is America. And they would get this money, or they would raise money off of these rates and then begin to buy or import goods from other nations. So what's happening is that we went off of that system, and now really essentially America just they call it borrowing and things of that nature, and they just steal the resources from these different tribes, and they don't have the money to pay. And when it comes time to pay, instead of paying, they try to drive down the rate by making these nations into what's called third world nations. Many of you have heard of third world nations. So I'm saying all that because you're always going to have these idiots and these different secret societies and these groups that are going to want to try to act like they're sovereign and independent and their team won, and they're going to try to extract credit from this Western team. However, they're not going to pay the rates. And what's going to happen is that it's going to eventually drive up debt here on this side due to the fact that they haven't paid these rates. And then, of course, you're going to have a situation where they want to destroy everything because they don't want to pay. So this is when they begin to try to drive nations into what's called a third world status. So what's going to happen in this election is that really, regardless to whoever wins, but especially, I hate to say it, but especially if the Democrats win, they're going to go ahead and try to use all of this credit that they've supposedly raised from these different games and stock market and all of that. And it's really not even theirs. It's called credit. The reason why I call it credit, it's not really even money. It's just credit because you're just basically just robbing Peter to pay Paul, essentially. And you call it credit because it's profit now, but what's going to happen is that when the market opens back up, it's going to turn into debt. So what they hurry up and do is that they do shorts. So they dump all the money as profit and then move on to something else. And it's a tactic, it's a scheme, but what's going to happen is that they're going to get cut off. So this particular tactic is not going to work because people are getting hip to it. So they're going to get cut off. They're not going to be able to use the credit from all of these other teams. And what's going to happen is that it's going to be death. I hate to say it. A lot of sacrificing, and this is where sacrificing comes in at. See, it's all based in sports, actually. Units. And when people don't have the money to pay these units, either they sending their family to jail, they sending their family into slavery. This has been going on for centuries. What do you think when you hear about the stories about slavery and the Africans selling their ancestors off into slavery, and they came over here and was slaves because of sport and play, games and chance that they lost, and all of a sudden the debt goes up. And then now, instead of you don't have the money to pay the debt because you never really had any commodities, any currency from the beginning. So then now you got to pay with blood. And that's what's going to happen. So until we master the number 8, which is really the master number, and master the contract that we got caught up in with drugs. See, they don't want to talk about that. We got caught up into a contract with drugs back in the early 1900s because it was a certain... See, it wasn't supposed to really be based on drugs. The currency wasn't, actually. And I'll do a video. It was really supposed to be based on Kundalini, believe it or not. The currency itself was supposed to be based on or backed by an energy that your body produces, your Kundalini energy. And what happened is that the drugs were used to activate Kundalini. And what happened is that they began to put the drug over the spiritual aspect or what the drug was supposed to be doing. So they essentially sold their soul to the drug or to the rate of the drug. And this may not sink in, but just watch it a couple times, you'll understand what I'm saying. So the rate of the drug eventually took over and bought out all the land because people kept using it and not paying on the rate. Because when you extract drugs from the ground and use it, there's a certain rate that you have to pay. So people kept using it, and then that's how we ended up getting into debt in the early 1900s. So then they came up with the Federal Reserve and all of that. So really the Federal Reserve and all of that stuff that you hear about, the banks, the world banks, is all based on drugs. And the reason why is because there was a contract that was supposed to fulfill itself, or that was supposed to be complete, and they never finished that contract. They quit. So they was using drugs and all of that or whatever. Never finished the contract, totally forgot about the contract, and then went off to a rehab scenario. So when you hear about like the Cherokees and the term Cherokee itself, this is going into a rehab scenario. Meaning that they left the land, left the commodities, went into a rehab scenario, began to use fiat notes. And that's where we are today. So, and it's no different. So you wondering, well, how come the Eastern team didn't win or whatever? It's because the rates. And anything out in California, anything really past Arizona, Arizona's ruled by the number 8. I did a video called Data Drugs, and you can understand this better. See, Arizona's ruled by the number 8. Anything past Arizona, Las Vegas, now when you get out to California and Washington and the West Coast, see, we never really bought the West Coast. That's all Aztec land. So you're not going to be able to claim any credit, but you're going to try to use credit for the election, and it's not going to work. And this is why we're in deep shit, in deep trouble. Because you're going to try to use the team and use this team to get money off of these people's land, and you haven't fulfilled certain contracts. And this is why checks keep bouncing. When these teams, certain teams lose or win, this is checks. You're watching checks bounce. When the stock market, like the stock market just dropped like 900 points a couple days ago, that's a check that bounced. And it's all based on land because, again, you didn't go to the astrologer or you didn't go to the numerologist. And when you did go to the numerologist, you didn't really get the information you were supposed to get to learn how the land was mapped out. And so that this nation could be set up correctly. So now we stuck in this scenario with gold, oil, and drugs back in the currency that we haven't paid on. So essentially we're just dancing in debt and underwater and in fiat. So that's my spill on it. Stay vigilant and wise. I'm going to come back up with another episode. As always, thank you for listening and watching. Namaste.